Hello, my name is M.W.Burnette. I am a home studio music producer, songwriter, and recording artist, and this is my video diary. So thank you for watching. So, if you've paid any attention to me for the past little while, something that I talk about quite a bit is this idea that the world that we live in is very different from the world that God intended for us to live in. So we have our ideas about the way that things should be and must be, and those ideas are very often contradictory to the design that God had in mind for us. As a general rule, I think that a lot of that comes down to this idea of our own autonomy. We don't want to rely on anyone other than ourselves. We don't want to have to, because that makes us feel insecure. We don't know if we can trust other people to do the things that we need. We feel like we have to provide for ourselves. And I don't think that God wants us to work that way. I think that God was very intentional about the way that He designed creation so that we would be interdependent on each other and on Him. This design is communal, and we often try to get away from that, and it's to our detriment that we do that. So today I want to talk about one aspect of that, and I guess that it kind of revolves around a few different issues. Some of that is urban design and automobiles, just the way that we structure our society. But what I wanted to say was that I think that one of the reasons that we tend to resist God's design, a part of the problem there is that we have a lack of imagination, and we just can't envision a world working any differently than the one that we know. We see the things around us, and they kind of make sense to us, and we recognize that maybe there's some problems with them, but we just assume that the way things are is the way that they have to be. That's just the way that they've come about, and that's the way that it is. We don't recognize that these things that we experience have been designed, that the world that we live in is the result of conscious decisions that have been made to make the world that way. And if we're creative, we can come up with alternative ways to create our world. So one of those ways that I'm going to talk about today in particular is about is about automobiles and the role that they play in the shape of the United States and the environment that we live. I think that it's really hard to argue that automobiles are, on the whole, good for us. There are many problems with them. One obvious one is that they're just dangerous. They're just plain dangerous. Not only to the person who's driving them, it's dangerous to those. Lots of people get killed in automobile accidents every year, but they're dangerous to everyone. It's dangerous for people to be in the road because they might get run over. And then there are also secondary dangers that because they pollute, their exhaust and oil drips out of them, all of that stuff ends up in our environment and ends up inside of our bodies, and that's not good for us. Not to mention that there's all of the other associated pollution and environmental destruction involved in extracting petroleum from the earth so that we can power these vehicles. Add into that the extraction of all the metal components, or the minerals to produce those metal components. There's just a lot of waste and a lot of energy and a lot of destruction and pollution that goes into the manufacture of automobiles. It's not good for us. Another problem that we have with automobiles is that they're really inefficient. And what I mean to say there is, I'm not just talking about gas mileage, but I'm talking about just what it is that they do and the cost that we have to pay to get it to do that. Their purpose is to move a person from point A to point B, right? But you think about how much energy is involved in doing that. So you take a person who weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 pounds, right? And you've got to move them, 4 or 5 miles down the road, that kind of thing. Just think about the amount of work that it takes to do that with an automobile. First of all, you have to build the automobile. You have to put gas in it. And then you've got to put a motor in it that's not going to just transport the person who weighs, 100, 200 pounds. You've now got to move something like 4,000 to 6,000 pounds in that automobile down that road. And not only do you have to move that person who takes up something in the neighborhood of, about 9 square feet of space, is you've got to transport this car, which takes up something in the neighborhood of about 200 square feet of space. And in addition to that, you have to have the roadway that's built, so you've got a 10-foot wide asphalt lane, 2 to 4 to 6 to 8, something like that, that traverses that 4 to 5 miles. And then you've got to have another 200 square feet of parking space at either end so that you can store that vehicle when you get out. So you just think about, in order for us to perform this very simple act of moving this one individual person 4 or 5 miles down the road, you've got all of this asphalt, you've got this massive weight and energy that it takes to move that vehicle, you've got all the manufacture and energy invested in building it and transporting it to the person selling it, all of those sort of things. There is a lot of embodied energy in that automobile just for the sake of moving a person 4 to 5 miles down the road. Now, okay, yeah, granted, we can take automobiles and travel farther with them, but again, maybe that's not the most efficient way to do that. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. But one of the other things that we don't realize, because we are so invested, we are so surrounded, blinded by the world that we live in, we're so familiar with our own environment that we don't always recognize just how automobiles make life unpleasant. And I bet when I said that just now, you thought I was crazy, but think about this, is if you ever spend time in a place where automobiles aren't, like if you go to a college campus and you walk around the quad, or if you go to an amusement park like Disney World or Six Flags, one of those type of places, and you walk around, or just a city park, you think about that sort of feeling of serenity and calm and safety that you feel there. That sense of peace that you have is largely due to the fact that there are not automobiles everywhere that endanger you. You don't have to worry about getting run over or about stepping out into the street or any of those things like that. You don't have to worry about all the noise that they make and all of the odors and pollution that come from them. All of that disappears when you get away from that section. And I think that hints at something for us, is that if we can use our imagination, then we can see that the world doesn't necessarily have to be the way that it is. We don't have to have paved streets everywhere and large parking lots everywhere and lots of vehicles in the way threatening our safety. We don't. Now, another one of the issues there is that we have sort of this vision of, this American idea of freedom and the open road. That's what they show in car commercials, is, this bright new shiny colorfully painted vehicle out on an open road through the desert, going out through Monument Valley or whatever on this, or out through the Appalachian Mountains on this curvy road with trees and rivers and so on and so forth. And that's just simply not the reality. The reality of owning an automobile means that most likely you use it primarily to commute to and from work or school or whatever, the things that you have to do every day, along with everybody else in your town at the same time. You're not on the open road, you're on a boulevard, you're going about maybe 35 miles an hour if traffic's not bad. More than likely, you're doing something in the neighborhood of about like 15 to 20 miles an hour a lot of the time, sitting there staring at taillights. That's the reality of owning an automobile. It's very different from this mythology that we have. So that's the reality of this. And we just accept it because it's what we're familiar with, and it doesn't occur to us that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And in fact, we're so used to it, we can't imagine things being any other way. Because if we start talking about, well, what if we got rid of automobiles? Kind of our first reaction is that, well, how am I going to get to work? How would I get to school? How do I bring groceries home? And those are legitimate questions. But the thing for us to keep in mind is that those are problems that we can find solutions to that don't involve automobiles, or at least not single occupant personal automobiles. As far as getting to work, well, the things that you need to do to get to work, you typically don't have to carry a lot of stuff with you to go to work. So public transit is an incredibly good option for that because it's very, very efficient. Whereas with, you think about moving, say, 100 people between their home and the office, and each one of them has an individual automobile. Well, 100 automobiles, is that what I said? 100 people? We'll say 100 people for now. So 100 people traveling to and from work in 100 different automobiles. You think about the amount of gasoline that's involved. You think about the amount of space they take up on the highway. You think about the number of parking spaces at either end that those 100 vehicles take up. Think about the amount of time those 100 vehicles have to spend looking for parking places once they arrive. Now compare that to, say, a bus, where you can fit 100 people maybe on one bus, if not one, then two. You don't have to have a parking place at the other end. And those two buses take up way less space on the highway than those 100 vehicles would. And you're accomplishing the same goal of moving those 100 people to and from work. Now, yeah, we're spread out all over the places, so it's not like those 100 people begin their journey at one point and finish their journey at another point, and that's all there is to it. So, yeah, there's some infrastructure that has to take place to accumulate all of those people in those point of origin and destination to make that work. But, again, that's something that's possible. It doesn't necessarily rely on individual, personally owned automobiles to do that. Another one of those kind of questions is like, well, another thing that we use our automobile for is to, when we go shopping, is we load up the car and we bring home our groceries or our furniture or whatever it is that we need. And again, yeah, automobiles make that possible, but it's not the only way that it could be done, and maybe not even the most efficient way to do that. You think now, especially during this pandemic, a lot of us have been doing our shopping online. So UPS and FedEx and Postal Service and so on had their hands pretty busy delivering packages. But that just goes to show you that you don't have to drive everywhere and pick up things and put them in the car to get them to your house. Some things you do. And it's not necessary that we completely eliminate automobiles entirely, but if we can create a system where there are other options, so that the only way to get from point A to point B is not just to take an automobile, then that makes things better all around, because not everyone will have to drive their automobile all the time, everywhere. And automobiles may not be the most efficient way of traveling in a lot of times. Like, it may Personally, I would love it if we had good public transportation that I could get on somewhere near my house and take to work, because that hour and a half, 2 hours that I spend commuting back and forth every day could go to much better use. I could be reading a book or a magazine or taking a little cat nap or something like that, not having to worry about killing myself on the highway every day. So it's just, again, like I said, it's a matter of us thinking outside of just what we know and trying to imagine a different kind of a world, because that's possible. Because the world that we live in, like I was saying, is built by intent, and we can change our intent, we can change our motivations, change our vision, and create a different world. And that also, so that's one example. I might talk about this more because I'm really just kind of getting warmed up. But this goes back to the idea of us living in God's creation and us trying to superimpose a different version of reality on top of that. Superimpose our own design on top of His. And it may be not necessary to do that. The way that we think that the world has to work in terms of, like our social structures and whatnot, might not be right. And it might be possible for us to move just a little bit closer to that version of the kingdom that God gave us, where we are interconnected and we depend on one another and we trust each other and we share what we have so that no one has to go without. So that's the vision that I want to leave you with, and I want to challenge you to try to imagine a different world and realize that a different world is possible. So, gone on for quite a while, but thank you for sticking around. I'll see you next time.